Roy Schwartz. I write about pop culture for CNN, IGN, The Forward, and other publications, and I am the author of Is Superman Circumcised? The Complete Jewish History of the World's Greatest Hero. This is Jack Kirby. Jack the King Kirby, for the uninitiated, is arguably the most important artist in the history of comics. He is a founding father of pop culture and one of the most influential artists in the 20th century. Kirby's magnum opus is The Fourth World, a meta-narrative told through several series between 1970 and 1973, all written and drawn by him. Like most Kirby creations, it's an eclectic mix of inspirations collaged together into something new and avant-garde. It's his most personal work, and even though it is about a pantheon of alien gods, it's also his most Jewish work, and probably the most Jewish work in mainstream superhero comics. Almost every issue is brimming with biblical, Talmudic, and Kabbalistic allusions. And it all started here, in New York's Lower East Side Jewish ghetto. Jack Kirby was born Jacob Kurtzberg in 1917 to Jewish immigrants from Austria, Benjamin and Rose. The family was conservative Jewish, and Kirby went to Hebrew school. He learned Jewish folklore and the art of storytelling from his mother, Rose. In 1939, at the age of 22, he and close friend Joe Simon became the first hires of a new publisher called Timely Comics, known today as Marvel. Simon was the editor, writer, and artist, and Kirby was the art director and artist. We discussed this in greater length in the Jewish Origins of the Marvel Universe episode, available on the CSP website for members only. Together, Simon and Kirby created Captain America. The first issue was cover dated March 1941, but it was published on December 20th, 1940, common for magazines, a full year before Pearl Harbor and America joined the war. This was a time when 93% of the American public was against intervention, and the entertainment industry was under public and political pressure to not offend the Germans and their supporters. These guys had Adolf Hitler smacked around on their cover. For Kirby, this was personal. He was fearful and furious at the rise of Nazism in Europe and in the US, and he and Simon created their hero in direct response. Kirby plainly stated, Captain America was me, and I was Captain America. When the Captain punches Hitler on the cover of his first issue, it was Kirby's own anger coming to the surface. He even based the character's background on his own life. Like Kirby, Steve Rogers grew up on the Lower East Side, was a short and scrawny kid with a natural talent for art, who got constantly picked on, developing a lifelong intolerance of bullies of any kind. Kirby borrowed regularly from Jewish tradition, and he might have also been inspired by King David, also a small, overlooked artistic youth who was rejected from armed service and made fun of, but who, with unwavering faith, picked up a star-shaped shield and saved his nation. These reflections of Kirby's background and culture reached their peak with The Fourth World. In the 1960s, Kirby and Stan Lee, also Jewish if you did not know, born Stanley Lieber, who was the editor and head writer at Marvel, reinvented the superhero genre. Together, they created the Fantastic Four, the Hulk, Thor, Ant-Man, Iron Man, the Avengers, the X-Men, Black Panther, and hundreds of other heroes, villains, characters, and concepts. They were the main architects of what we now know as the Marvel Universe. And in many of these properties, they incorporated Jewish themes, whether borrowed from the Bible or Talmud or Yiddishkeit or Kirby's own life. We discussed this in the Marvel Universe episode as well as last episode on the X-Men. But a quick example is The Thing, who's based on Kirby and is even named Benjamin Jacob after Kirby and his father. In the 1970s, Kirby left Marvel to work for DC, and he used the opportunity to bring his interest in Jewish culture and folklore to the forefront. Kirby was the biggest name in the industry. It was as if John Lennon had left the Beatles to join the Rolling Stones. In an era when creators barely got credit in the comics, especially at DC, Kirby got his own house ads. His comics proudly announced, "Kirby is here." He had his pick, and he chose, of all things, the spin-off series Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, beginning with issue 133. He used it as a launching pad for what would come to be considered his masterwork, the Fourth World Saga, an interconnected narrative told through various series over 3 years, including 3 new titles: New Gods, Forever People, and Mr. Miracle. Jimmy Olsen 134 introduced the saga's breakout character, the villain Darkseid. Kirby's bad guys were often fascists rather than criminals or lunatics like the Nazi Red Skull and Eastern European dictator Dr. Doom, but with Darkseid he took the concept to its ultimate conclusion. A dark god who conquered his world and enslaved or exterminated those he deemed inferior on a quest to subjugate all of creation. He is a cosmic Hitler. Darkseid is a jackbooted dictator and warlord, often found speechifying from his balcony. The spelling of his name is German, loosely translated as "we are dark." Darkseid is exactly that, the dark side of humanity. He commands an army of hive-minded airborne soldiers called parademons, combining Nazi groupthink and the Luftwaffe. And his world, Apocalypse, likewise spelled with a German K, is a militant society dedicated to ceaseless universal war. It's a planet-wide concentration camp where those deemed inferior, labeled lowlies, are enslaved, made gaunt prisoners in striped headwear. They are worked to death in the Armageddon fire pits, obviously combining Armageddon and ghetto, perpetual furnaces that inexorably evoke the crematoriums of the Holocaust. For any dissent, they face collective punishment like group firing squads and hangings. Those lucky enough to be conscripted into Darkseid army are called worms, and they are brought in on trains and beaten immediately upon arrival. When Darkseid is announced, it's "Hail Darkseid, Hail Darkseid, wielder of the Holocaust." Subtlety was never Kirby's strong suit, nor interest. Darkseid is the Platonic ideal of authoritarianism. He seeks not their territorial conquest, but the anti-life equation, a sci-fi spell giving its wielder complete control over free will itself. It's a metaphorical warning that if the right formula, the right conditions, right demagoguery is in the wrong hands, we might find ourselves swept up mindlessly in a madman's quest for power. The dark gods of Apocalypse, especially Darkseid's elite, his high command, is similarly based on Nazi archetypes. His top general is Steppenwolf, whose name is also German and means steppe wolf or grasslands wolf, a possible wordplay on General Rummel, the desert fox. You may know Steppenwolf from the 2017 and 2021 Justice League movies, for better or worse. Several other members of Darkseid's elite have Germanic names, like the buffoonish Verman Wunderbar. His name vermin, is a combination of vermin and man. Wunderbar is a phonetic spelling of wunderbar, German for wonderful. Again, it's meant to be farce. He's said to be based on Mussolini, which seems apt with the sash and aiguillette, that's the braided ornament, but his outfit is otherwise a hybrid of Prussian and Nazi uniforms, including a tunic, black patent leather jackboots, and armband. Especially with the monocle and haircut, he also looks an awful like Werner von Frisch, the commander-in-chief of the German army in the 1930s and a member of the German High Command. Another member of Darkseid's elite who has a counterpart in the Nazi High Command is Glorious Godfrey. Godfrey literally meaning in German, God, and free, meant to be ironic. He is Darkseid's propagandist, responsible for brainwashing people with the message of anti-life. He gives bombastic speeches filled with slogans of power, convincing his audience to surrender their free will with excitement. He is basically Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's minister of propaganda, who, by the way, has an interesting personal history with Superman, which we discuss in episode 1, available on the CSP website for members. Godfrey's slogans, like anti-life makes you right and it is a gift, are evocative of Arbeit macht frei, work sets you free, which was the sign over the entrance to Auschwitz and similar signs in other Nazi camps. Kirby even opens the third issue of Forever People with a quote from Hitler. But while the evil gods are Nazi metaphors, the good new gods who oppose them are brimming with Jewish signification. Beginning with the very name of the opus, the fourth world. Kirby never explained the term, at least not explicitly. He famously gave different answers every time he was asked, so it's remained the subject of some debate ever since. But he alluded it to mean more than just a historical era, but rather a plane of existence. This strongly echoes the Midrashic and Kabbalistic concept of the four worlds. In Jewish ontology and mysticism, existence is divided into four spiritual and physical planes, each with its own sephirot, or spheres, which together form the cosmological tree of life. These four worlds are manifestations of God. The tree of life was also an inspiration for the famous X-Men storyline, the Dark Phoenix saga, which we discussed last episode, also available on the CSP website. And if you're interested in learning more about Kabbalah, there are several videos on the CSP website as well. The first issue of New Gods opens with an ancient era was passing in fiery Holocaust. Then there was light, which is obviously very evocative language and ties together Jewish history, still pretty recent, when this was published, in Jewish faith. The whole Fourth World saga is told with biblical resonance, filled with language and imagery evoking or taken directly from Scripture. The good guys are the gods of New Genesis, an Eden-like planet of unspoiled natural beauty. And of course, New Genesis is also a highly suggestive term. The closest the narrative offers to a protagonist is Orion, the biological son of Darkseid, raised on New Genesis by its leader, Highfather. He is something of a Moses figure, a child raised in the royal court of his people's enemies, except that he remains to fight by their side. And like Moses, he continuously struggles with his hot temper. Orion is also based on Kirby himself, who was a gruff, at least outwardly, World War II Bronze Star recipient. When Orion's true face is revealed, we see it here, it's an exaggerated self-portrait down to the bushy eyebrows. Kirby did this often, like with the Thing. Orion's adoptive brother, Mr. Miracle, starred in his own title as a hairy Houdini, like god of escape. Long before Michael Chabon posited Houdini, the son of a rabbi born Erich Weiss, is an overlooked source of the superhero idea in his 2001 Pulitzer-winning novel, The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. Miracle's wife, Big Barda, was based physically and visually on Jewish singer and actress Lainie Kazan, born Levine or Levine, and her personality on Kirby's wife, Roz. Metron, who traveled through space in his Mobius chair to observe and record the universe, was based in likeness and demeanor on Leonard Nimoy, Jewish, while his name and role are patently derived from the archangel Metatron, described in the Talmud and Kabbalah as the recording angel, a celestial scribe and guardian of secrets who's noted to be continually sitting when performing his heavenly duties, the only being in existence allowed to do so before God, just like Metron of the New Gods. Metron's outfit features a pattern of interconnected spheres and lines, one of Kirby's signature design motifs, resembling, certainly in this context, the Kabbalistic tree of life. There's also Hymen, a homophone of the Yiddish name Hyman, who is a scientist and mystic based on the Jewish Sheldon Sheldorf, founder of San Diego Comic-Con and a friend of Kirby's. He is the inventor of mother boxes, which are small rectangular supercomputers that connect to the all-knowing source, which were initially drawn as black cubes worn with stripes wrapping down the arm, as you see here, looking an awful lot like tefillin. And Hyman's daughter is named Becca, spelled with two K's, as in Rebecca, the biblical matriarch. But the most Jewish character of the Fourth World Saga is Highfather, leader of New Genesis and Darkseid's foil. He is a bearded, robed sage and prophet, and he even carries a magical shepherd's crook called the Wonder Staff. He was born Isaiah, obviously a homophone on the biblical prophet Isaiah, whose name means appropriately God is salvation, Yeshayahu. He sojourned into the desert wasteland of New Genesis in search of enlightenment, where he first encountered the Source, a higher power that spoke to him in flame, bestowed upon him a new destiny and grave responsibility, and he returned to lead his people in their fight against oppression as Highfather. The Source is described as eternal and beyond all the knowledge and sweeping concept of our command, serene, omnipotent, all-wise. It is the origin of the written word, and it communes with Highfather through the wall, the last remnant of the old gods, evoking the Western Wall in Jerusalem, Judaism's holiest site, and the last remnant of the ancient temple where priests communed with God. Highfather is clearly Moses, and the Source is clearly God. This isn't subtext but text, a deliberate evocation of the Bible. Again, subtlety wasn't what Kirby was going for here. he essentially based the good gods on Jewish figures and the evil gods on Nazis, including their respective philosophies. And in doing so, he casts the celestial struggle in terms of Judaism versus totalitarianism. The fourth world is a Jewish fable in science fiction form. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Kirby added to Metropolis, Superman's city, the neighborhood of Southside, nicknamed Suicide Slum, based on the Lower East Side where he grew up. And in Suicide Slum, there's Detective Dan Terrible Turpin, yet another squat, crusty, bushy-eyebrowed character. Kirby was always putting himself into his comics with different degrees of likeness. Kirby died in 1994, and when in 1996 Superman, the animated series, aired, he was posthumously honored by having Turpin redesigned to look exactly like him. In the last episode of the series, which is dedicated to Kirby, Turpin sacrifices his life to save Superman and stand up to Darkseid, as we see here. He is given a Jewish funeral, including a Kaddish, which is not something you'd expect to find in a Saturday morning cartoon. Since then, Turpin has been based directly on Kirby in various appearances. The New Gods was such a personal story for Kirby that he based another character on himself, Oberon. The name, of course, is taken from the fairy king in medieval and Renaissance folklore. Oberon is famous from Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, and also one of the moons of Uranus is named after him. But here he is Mr. Miracle's manager, and like Turpin and many other Kirby characters, he's short, stocky, bushy-eyebrowed, and has a gruff attitude. And like Turpin, he's come to be drawn a lot more like Kirby in later years, as we see here. Kirby also put Stan Lee in the comic. When Kirby left Marvel, it was unamicable, at least on Kirby's part. So he created Funky Flashman, a thinly veiled pastiche of Lee, who is a shameless, self-promoting, glad-handing showbiz con man, who tries to be Mr. Miracle's manager on Earth, and coincidentally has a somewhat Jewish name. Kirby later regretted it, claiming that he meant it as a good-natured jab, but it was seen in the industry as bitter and vicious, and Lee was hurt by it. Like many great works, the Fourth World Saga was unappreciated in its time. It was a grand space opera 7 years before Star Wars. It was a commercial disappointment for DC, though this is debated, but either way, by 1973, it was canceled. But its high-minded concepts and original characters have since become cornerstones of the DC universe. Darkseid went on to become one of Superman's greatest villains, which is apt given that the Man of Steel was created as a Jewish reaction to Nazism. We discussed this in episode 1, available on the CSP website. Eventually, he also became the Justice League's big baddie. And he's appeared in numerous cartoons, becoming a household name. As well as video games and even a quick appearance in the 2017 Justice League movie. Fun fact, he was also the inspiration for Thanos, Marvel's cosmic villain, who started out in 1973 as little more than a rip-off combination of Metron and Darkseid. Thanos is a more complex character, But Darkseid remains the superior villain, a pure flat character, more force of nature embodied than something comprehensible or sympathetic. After Kirby, Fallen creators have handled the Fourth World with mixed results. But it wasn't until very recently that they picked up on its Jewish themes. Jewish writer Tom King, who made Green Lantern canonically Jewish, covered in episode 4, available on the CSP website, and artist Mitch Gerrits filled their Mr. Miracle series, which ran from 2017 to 2019, with Jewish subject matter. It introduced Miracle and Barda's newborn son, Jacob, implicitly named after Kirby and explicitly after Jacob's ladder, an apocalyptic means of salvation reaching from the hellish fire pits to a figurative heaven, borrowed obviously from the biblical patriarch's famous dream sequence. At the same time, the series killed off Oberon, giving him the surname Kurtzberg. Tom King also wrote the script for a New Gods movie, which Ava DuVernay, director of Selma and A Wrinkle in Time, was hired to direct in 2018. But it floundered in development hell and was eventually canceled in 2021. If it or a different take are ever back on, it'll be interesting to see if it does justice to the comic's unbridled imagination as well as rich Jewish heritage. In the comics, meanwhile, in last year's Green Lantern 12, the Source manifested in corporeal form. And it wasn't a flaming hand or a burning bush, it was Jack Kirby, appropriately, the king of comics and source of DC's cosmology. Kirby returned briefly to the property in the 80s, but he never really got to finish it. He did, however, carry over some of its themes, including the Jewish ones, into his next project back at Marvel called The Eternals, which is the subject of our next episode. Until then, may the Source be with you. Thank you.